So, great. So welcome everybody here in the rec center and everybody out there in Zoom line. Thank you for tuning in. We got a great presentation. I think everybody knows I'm a little partial to our presenter tonight. Well, I can't push it any further over, so we just have to, it won't come over any further. We'll just have to talk into it. You all right with that? Yeah, can't get it any closer without knocking this out. Anyway, so we have a wonderful presentation for you tonight. And then after that, we will have some brief announcements, mostly our upcoming activities. And then we have our famous door prize after that, door prizes drawing. I hope everybody got some of those great refreshments. I want to thank Jan and John Lockwood for bringing refreshments tonight. And I was remiss in not thanking Donna Benson last week. She dropped them off and then she went off to some more fun activity, and she had out-of-town guests. But I want to thank Donna for bringing refreshments last week as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Patty to introduce our speaker tonight. Do you want me to start it right away, or do you want to say a few words? I'll let Patty go. Because I can.
Well, I'm really excited to introduce Andrew tonight. He didn't want Nancy to introduce him because she knows all the dirt. So I've got what he gave me to introduce him with. No, it's good. So he's been a lifelong birder, originally based in Charlottesville, was the founding member of the Blue Ridge Young Birders. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Club. He continues education at College of William and Mary, so a lot of you know him. He received a double major in biology and environmental science and policy. He worked on many projects while he was a student, as well as in graduation, including the Breeding Bird Atlas for Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, Connecticut. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. The Coastal Wildlife Observatory as a Kiptopee hawk watcher, and a migratory entomologist for 2 seasons. 2 seasons he did that. He's currently works as a field zoologist for the Virginia Natural Heritage Program, where he monitors populations of state rare animals. It's kind of cool. So his inspiration for the presentation came late in college when he became deeply fascinated by pelagic wildlife. To get up close and personal experience with the offshore wildlife, he worked for several months on a fishing boat out of Hatteras, studying marine wildlife in the Gulf Stream. Since then, he's ventured offshore dozens of times, representing several tour companies around the mid-Atlantic, including what Rudy, you said, and others. So I'm excited that Andrew's willing to come and share his knowledge with us. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Right now. But it's a pleasure to be here this evening. I see a lot of familiar faces. As you guys know, just from the introduction, I went to William and Mary, so I got to spend a lot of time with many of you as an undergrad going on field trips. So it's great to be back, and I'm really happy to be presenting on something that I really love. So this evening, we're going to be talking about the Seabirds of Virginia. I'm going to be honest, this presentation is pretty dense. There's a lot of things that I would love to talk about, and I'm going to be introducing a lot of these pretty briefly. And so there'll be time at the end to ask questions if we want to go more in depth about certain topics. I'm going to set a timer real quick on my phone so that I actually keep on task and try to get you guys out of here within the next 5 or 6 hours. Hopefully we can reduce the total time. But this evening, I'm going to be first introducing seabirds and what that means. And then I'm going to be honing in that definition to what we're going to be mainly talking about this evening. Then I'm going to talk about Virginia seabird habitat, factors that influence seabirds' presence and absence. Then we're going to do a very brief introduction of a very cool biological topic called species complexes, which is very relevant for seabirds and also for a lot of other organisms. It's not as common in birds anymore because there's been a lot of really good research, but seabirds are still a lot of these species complexes. So we're going to be talking about those this evening. And then finally, we're going to do a speed run of a lot of the really cool seabird species you can see in Virginia. This is going to be very fast. So we're going to, I just felt like I had to do a little bit of talking about it. You'll get to see me demonstrate flight patterns, so you get to laugh at me at that point. And then at the very end, I'm going to try to introduce how we are connected to seabirds here in Williamsburg, Virginia, and how we can make a difference for seabird populations. All right. Perfect. Alrighty, so seabirds is a very broad term. It doesn't necessarily entitle just one or two groups. So it can include terns, gulls, even sea ducks such as scoters or eiders. And then there's kind of these more classic seabirds like albatrosses, storm petrels, jaegers, petrels, the list goes on and on. So seabirds is a very, very broad topic of things that spend the majority of their life offshore. But this evening, we're going to be reducing that to a smaller, slightly more manageable, but still big task. We're going to be talking about the order Proceliformes, which includes albatrosses, shearwaters, petrels, and storm petrels. We're going to talk about some of those species that you can see here in Virginia. We're going to be talking about jaegers and skuas briefly, and then a little bit about tropic birds because they're beautiful, and then some about tropical terns because they're a special pelagic species that we only place to see them is offshore. All right. So we're going to talk about Virginia's seabird habitat. So this is an image of Virginia's offshore waters. The first 60 to 70 miles from shore is the continental shelf. This is called the photic zone. It's maybe 200 to 300 feet deep, relatively shallow when it comes to the Grand Ocean. This area is where we see a lot of our gulls, our terns, but it's not where a lot of these specialized seabirds hang out, because they're after food that lives in much, much deeper waters. So then once you head further offshore, you get into these sloped canyons and you start diving down from 200 to 300 feet to well over 1,000 and beyond feet deep. And this is where a lot of sea life lives. There are a lot of whales, a lot of fish that live way down the bottom of the ocean and then maybe come up in the evening. And so there's a lot more much more biodiversity out here in this deep water. Now, a special thing that actually starts, this is the southernmost point in the Atlantic in which we have these canyons, these self-indenting deep water canyons. You've maybe heard about our Virginia pelagics. A lot of times we go to this Norfolk Canyon, the southern of the two, and then there's also the Washington Canyon. These are the two canyons you can go and visit here in Virginia. These canyons have been created from an extremely long period of time of upwelling and downwelling of currents that have sliced from the deep water into the shallow, more shallow continental shelf and create these really high concentration of nutrient zones. So when we go on offshore projects, we try to target these canyons by going into the mouth here because it's much deeper right around the mouth of these canyons, but it also has a lot of nutrients and it can concentrate a lot of seabird life and marine mammal life. All right, another very important thing, and you guys have maybe heard of the Gulf Stream, are these offshore water currents. These currents are incredibly important in functioning and dragging nutrients all over the ocean. And the Gulf Stream is incredibly important here in North America, as it is even off of Northwest Europe. So we have these warm waters getting sucked up in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and kind of cruising up along Florida, and then right off of Hatteras, North Carolina. And then usually they cut off and start heading further offshore and actually head up to the northwestern parts of Europe. This warm water has a lot of food that moves along with the currents there. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those food items, but this warm water is incredibly important to the climate all around the Atlantic coast of the United States and off of Northwest Europe. It creates an environment for Northwest European countries to be much milder than it would be based off of latitude or longitude. I don't know, I'm talking about birds, I don't know what I'm talking about there. But this is really important to understand. The Gulf Stream is this important current that brings a lot of this tropical warm water nutrients into Virginia waters. Now, the important thing to understand about currents, and especially the Gulf Stream, is you can never drop a pin and say, this is where it is on this given day. It is constantly moving with currents, wind, waves. It kind of moves this system all around the ocean. Oop, I'm sorry if I'm kind of coming in and out of the microphone there. It's constantly kind of moving its position. So when there are days of strong east storms or east winds, the Gulf Stream might come a little bit closer to the Virginia coast or North Carolina coast, and vice versa if there's west. So it's a constantly moving current. The other important current here, which I don't have a picture of, is the Labrador current. This is our cold water current here in Virginia. It comes from northeastern Canada down along and off of Virginia's coast, kind of a little bit closer than the Gulf Stream. And it's very relevant in the wintertime. The interaction between the Gulf Stream and the Labrador current usually occurs off of Oregon's Oregon Inlet off North Carolina, and then off Virginia Beach. So in the wintertime, we have a very awesome diversity off of our waters with humpback whales and a lot of other really special seabirds such as puffins, murres, gulls. It's really awesome to go out in the wintertime of Virginia and see some of this diversity. So we have two important ocean currents, the Gulf Stream with our tropical water and the Labrador Current with our really cold water. All right, so there are 5 factors I'm going to talk about this evening. Some of them are more important in predicting seabird presence or activity. And they're going to get a little bit about seabird biology and what makes seabirds tick and how these factors might bring in seabirds. Winds. Seabirds, a lot of seabird species, especially in the order Procelliformes, the shearwaters, storm petrels, albatrosses, they spend almost their entire life offshore. I'll talk a little bit more about this bottom image in a second, but they breed for a short period of time, and even while they're breeding, they're offshore gathering food, feeding their young. So they spend very little time on land, which means they need to be able to move long distances with very, very little energy. And they do this by utilizing winds. Seabirds are almost like sailboats. When they're flying, they'll arch up in the sky, they'll turn their wings up to catch wind, which will then give them a lot of momentum, and they'll push them down, and they use that momentum to then swoop back up again. And they go in this very arching pattern as they fly across the ocean. So when you see a lot of these specialized seabirds, they're not usually flying in straight lines, they're actually arching, and that's them catching the wind, which is allowing them to move without even flapping. There are even some seabird species that are able to fall asleep while flying and cruise hundreds of miles in their sleep. So winds play an incredibly important factor in where seabirds are. So if they're like this map right here in the top right, these are strong eastern winds blowing up into Hatteras and off of Virginia Beach. Those would be very good conditions to potentially see seabirds.
You want to,
Oh, perfect.
well, wait,
Oh, does it show that way?
it's supposed to show.
Are
Sorry,
people in Zoom seeing a little red circle?
I don't think they can.
Okay. Oh,
I added that hoping that it would show, but yeah, because the people on Zoom don't see.
yeah, don't see me. So the top right is the windy map showing the winds coming from the east blowing onto the coastline. And those sorts of conditions, especially when they're really strong, can be really good to go out and look for seabirds. Though you're going to get a lot of wind in your face. All right, in the bottom left is an incredible map of sooty shearwaters that breed off of New Zealand. This is a pelagic species that is known for incredibly long distant migrations. This is all movement of multiple individuals within a single year. They breed and then they'll head east and cruise north along the coast of South America. And that's kind of their like post-breeding, so I guess like their quote unquote fall migration, if you're thinking about our terms. And then they move north and spend their winter, their non-breeding season in our waters in our summertime. So they spend their summers or their winters in our summer waters in the North Pacific. And then when the spring and our fall, their spring, they're heading back south across the Pacific down to New Zealand where they're starting to breed. And then all those blue lines you see around New Zealand, those are just foraging trips. They find their colony and they're like, all right, we're gonna go get some food. They'll travel hundreds of miles just to get food over a few days to bring back to their nest. So seabirds are strongly dependent to travel super long distances on winds, or else they could not make these extremely long distance movements or migrations. Sooty shearwater is one of the more spectacular species. We are able to see that here in the Atlantic Ocean as well, but this map, it just shows it really how spectacular they are in migration.
Andrew, back in that
Mhm.
slide, is there a lot of breeding in Japan as well?
So the question was if there was any breeding in Japan, and so that is actually just their non-breeding time period. So the orange lines, sorry, I should have used the colors instead of pointing. So the orange lines is actually just their non-breeding season. So sooty shearwaters don't breed in the North Pacific. They actually breed down north. This population breeds off New Zealand. So that's just them squiggling around, hanging out for the winter, finding food and the currents off of Japan. Another incredibly important thing is water temperature. This is a water temperature map, which shows really tropical waters around the equator. And then as you move further north, you see slowly getting into colder and colder waters. You can even vaguely see actually where the Gulf Stream flows off of goes from down from the Caribbean up towards North Carolina, and then it cuts away from the coast. And you see that red extends much further north in that area than it does on the Pacific. And it kind of heads up towards northwestern Europe. You see that yellow band is much further north than it is in many other parts of the ocean. So that's how those ocean currents can dictate water temperatures. When you're offshore, it's incredibly important to pay attention to where the winds are coming from and what the water temperature is, because the water temperature dictates what food is there. A lot of fish and squid, they're really tuned in to how warm the water is, because they specialize on plankton, krill, other much smaller food items that have to be in certain water temperatures. So water temperature, sometimes on winter trips, we'll be going out there and we'll see a teeny little, on a map, we'll see a teeny little warm spot. And we'll be seeing very little birds, maybe a razorbill here and there. And then right when you get in the right proper warm spot, you'll start seeing puffins and dovekies. So it can be drastic, the change in what you're starting to see just based off of a small change in water temperature. All right, moon cycle. This is a really cool phenomenon that happens with seabirds. But to understand it, we got to understand the system that is how seabirds actually feed. Seabirds, obviously, they're flying. Most of them cannot dive very deep, so they're dependent on food being right there at the surface. Now, if a fish knows that they're going to get eaten if they go near the surface, they're not going to want to hang out anywhere near the surface. And what happens is you have these large predatory fish, such as mahi-mahi. This is an example you can see off Virginia. These large predatory fish, they'll get in schools and actually herd the small forage fish up towards the surface. And the fish and the birds can tune in, seeing a lot of splashing. They can even smell the oils in the squids or fish that are up near the surface. And then they come in from above and attack the fish from above. So these mahi-mahi might be pushing the small forage fish or squid up to the surface, and the birds are attacking them as well. So it's this concentration point. This can also happen with whales as well, for species of seabird that eat much smaller food items that whales might be feeding on, like humpback baleen whales. So birds really are looking for what's going out below the water to understand where they might be able to feed. These are really cool organisms I have to point out. Over on the middle left, those are actually flying squid. If you didn't know those are a thing, they've adapted to be able to glide. They gain speed and actually shoot out of the water and then glide away from their predators below. And then you have flying fish right there in the middle. And so this is the perfect opportunity for a bird who's just sitting there waiting for the prey to get kicked out of the water. And then, oh, there it is. It's flying right to me. Perfect. So it's a really cool to see all these things work together. Now, how is this relevant to moon cycle? I haven't talked about that at all. The moon at night, if there is a full moon, a lot of these predatory fish can still make the outline. As they look up, they can make out the outline of the forage fish, and they can feed all night long. That means during the day, the fish are, like the mahi-mahis, packed full. I don't need to feed all day, so it sits much lower down in the water. If you're going on a fishing trip, which is how I kind of learned this, you're not going to catch many mahi or in some of these other large fish on days after a full moon, because they've fed all night long and they're much lower. And because of that, there's not as much bird activity. The birds understand and they can see that there's very little activity on the surface. And so on those post full moon days, birds are not going to be as, I guess they're not going to expect as much food to get pushed towards the surface. So this is not as critical as wind and water temperature, but it's a really cool phenomenon. Sargassum. All right, sargassum is this pelagic seaweed. There are small air bubbles in sargassum that actually allow them to float. And when there are these ocean currents, such as the Gulf Stream, they create these long linear mats of sargassum all across the ocean. And this is really cool because there's tons of food and animals that specialize in living in sargassum. On the top right, we have a sargassum fish. And the bottom right, we have a sargassum crab. These are just a few things that live in the sargassum. So there's a lot of biodiversity that concentrates over these large pelagic seaweed mats. And because of that, birds hang out where there's sargassum. So if there's large sargassum mats, it's worth going and checking them out to see what birds might be active on them. There's even a species that just renamed this, Sargasso shearwater, which used to be the Audubon shearwater. This was named because it's usually in tropical waters where there's a lot of sargassum growing. but it is also a species that specializes on hanging around these large sargassum mats and picking out the crabs and fish that live within them. And time of day. This is actually a sargasso / Audubon shearwater in the middle left. That thing is tired. That's ready for a nap. Time of day, just as in regular birding around here, on land, plays a critical role in what you may or may not see. In the middle of the day, it's really hot in the summertime. A lot of these birds, they don't want to exert a lot of energy. They're just going to sit around. So you can see when you're in the middle of the day, sometimes you just see large rafts of storm petrels, shearwaters, all just sitting around hanging out. And that can make finding birds a little bit more challenging, because the best way to detect them, especially when there's waves, is seeing them fly around. Now, there's also something very cool with time of day, and that is that some pelagic bird species feed on food items that only come out at night, only come to the surface at night. And so they're able to smell with these tube noses. This is another cool thing with seabirds. I told you this is going to be a dense presentation. Oh no. Ah, I got too excited. Sorry, Nancy.
Let's see what we can do. It should come back up.
To those that are on Zoom, you might not see, but perfect. I've deactivated the screen, but we're back on it. All righty. So where was I? Oh, seabirds. They have these tube noses. You can see in the bottom right, I'm not taking the wire this time. There's these small little tubes that sit on top of the bill on the upper mandible, and those are able to be used to detect oils and salts. So it's seabirds on their way out over the ocean, they can smell food from miles and miles away, and then they'll fly towards it and try to get a piece of the action. If there's a lot of food activity near the surface, it's usually pretty brief. So they got to be quick in finding and smelling it and then getting there. But this also allows seabirds to feed at night. So they, without even really being able to see well, they can smell the squid with all the oils up near the surface or any other food item. So they're able to feed at night. And there are some pelagic trips that go out at night, and then they get there right at the crack of dawn, and they'll detect a lot of species. They'll hear them around in the evening. And then an hour after dawn, they're still seeing them, such as this is one species, the Rapp storm petrel is known for this, is really active at night. And then you only see them right at the crack of dawn. And then the rest of the day, it's very hard to find them. So a lot of these species are really active overnight, and then there's the dawn, and then become much more challenging to find. They either go into much deeper waters or they sit around and are harder to detect. So time of day can be important in finding certain species. All right, species complexes. Woo. Species complexes are a really cool biological concept. It's usually when there are a group of species that look very similar and are initially described as one species, or a group of species that look very, very similar but have very different breeding ranges. We'll get into that because that was not described very well. The Corey shearwater is the one we're going to mainly focus about, because there's actually 3 species that have come up from originally what was described as a Corey shearwater. Bandrome storm petrel is another relevant species here in the Atlantic, and black-capped petrel might also be a species where there are a couple species represented by black-capped petrel. So their species complex means that there's one species, which actually might be multiple different species based off of where they're breeding. So Corey shearwater is a really cool complex. There are now currently 3 species recognized within the Corey shearwater complex. You have the classic Corey shearwater. They couldn't come up with a new name. That's a little disappointing. They're very large. They have very thick bills. And then you have the Scopely shearwater, which are a little bit smaller. They have a little bit skinnier, elongated bills. And actually, the important thing, and I'll describe this to Zoom, but I'll point it out here, these little white tongues in the outer primaries are essential to identify this. While the Corey shearwater typically has black outer primary tongues, the Scopely shearwater has these white tongues that protrude into these primaries. So for those that are online, you're looking at the very tip of the wing, those very dark feathers, and there's more white that protrudes from the base of those feathers, called view tongues. And that's how you feel confident in the Scopely's versus Corey shearwater. So you can understand that for hundreds of years, when you're rocking around on a boat, you're not going to be able to see a tiny little white bit of feathers and think, oh, these are different species. This has just been something that over time, with advances in photography and in understanding where these species breed, new species are being discovered. And then in the bottom middle, this is the Cape Verde shearwater. It's an extremely rare bird here in Virginia. We've never had a record. There are a few records in the Atlantic just off the East Coast. There's one in Massachusetts and at least one in North Carolina. But this is a species that breeds in a very different location, which I'm going to show now. These are the different breeding ranges. The colors show up all right. So the Corey's shearwater in the top left, the orange spots are the islands that it breeds on. So off northwestern Africa, there's a handful of little orange spots, and those are the different breeding colonies. The Scopely's shearwater, this breeds primarily in the Mediterranean. There's a whole lot of little orange dots in the Mediterranean. I know it's hard to see, unfortunately. And then in the Cape Verde shearwater, breeds off of Western Africa in a much smaller constricted area. So over time, this large complex started breeding in different areas, started breeding at different times, and then started becoming genetically isolated, which formed separate species. So they look very similar. They're all from the exact same initial parent species, and now they've become different species over time. And so they have different usages of the ocean as well. The Cape Verde shearwater is very rare off our Atlantic coast, but it usually spends its non-breeding season off South America. While the Corey shearwater is the most abundant, it likes a little bit colder water, so it can range much further south, much further north than, say, the Scopely shearwater. This range map, I'm going to be honest, is not entirely accurate for Scopely shearwater because it does come all the way to Virginia and North Carolina waters. It prefers a little bit warmer waters, so it's really tied to the Gulf Stream. So it can be a little bit harder to see off Virginia because the Gulf Stream is a little bit further offshore. So this is the crazy world that is seabird species complexes, and there are tons of other species that are just being realized are actually these complexes. All right, this is where it's going to get a little crazy. I'm going to do pretty much a speed run. Let's see what we're doing on time. Oh, all right, we're actually doing all right on time. Cool. So we'll get to spend a little bit more time than I was expecting on a lot of our seabird species here in Virginia. I'm hoping to give you guys some tips and tricks on how to identify them, and hopefully a little bit about the water preference, because every species likes a specific type of water temperature, and then the time of year. All righty, so the Wilson storm petrel. This is actually the most common bird in the world, believe it or not. A pelagic species that breeds on the subantarctic islands, but it spends its non-breeding season throughout the Atlantic and the Pacific. It is actually another species complex, unfortunately enough, but the nice thing is that we will only be getting one of those species. So if you're concerned that your list is going to be ripped apart by splitting birds, we only have one that's represented here off the east coast of the United States. The Wilson storm petrel is pretty distinctive relative to our other storm petrels in that it has a really long legs, and they protrude far beyond the tail, and you can see those toes are pointing out beyond the end of the tail, and that is very, very helpful. Now, another thing that is helpful in hawk watching and some other kind of tricky to identify bird situations is actually how birds fly. Wilson storm petrels fly like swallows. So if you've seen tree swallows, barn swallows flying around lake or meadows, they have this very fluttery, kind of fast, kind of touch and go flight. It's just very careless. And this is exactly how Wilson storm petrels fly. And they also use their legs to kind of bounce around in the water. So that's very distinctive versus the other storm petrel species who have a very different flight style. The Leach's storm petrel, this is a colder water species that does actually breed in the United States. It breeds off the northeastern coast of New England on these very isolated rocky islands. These are much larger than Wilson storm petrels, and they actually fly like nighthawks. So if you've seen nighthawks, they have this very deep, bouncy flight. Sorry for people that might actually be able to see me. They have a very deep, bouncy flight, very different than that kind of fast, fluttery, careless Wilson storm petrel. So even though they look very similar, very dark bird with a white rump, they fly very differently. So sometimes you just have to like take your binoculars down and just see how the bird is flying to actually identify them, which is very different than typical birding. These also have a much more forked tail, and you can see that the toes and the legs do not protrude beyond the tip of the tail. These are really cool, kind of a colder water species. This is the bandworm storm petrel I introduced it a little bit earlier. This is a more tropical storm petrel species with a really flat edge tail. The toes do not protrude beyond the tail. This one flies very differently than the others. It's very scythe-like. It kind of It's very shouldery. It's just gonna be it's always awkward to try to demonstrate. It kind of like shoves its wings forward, kind of in this very like kind of bouncy flight, but not as deep, flappy as Leach's storm petrel, and not as fluttery as a Wilson's storm petrel. Also a very large species, similar to the Leach's storm petrel. They're very long-winged, and so they look much different than a Wilson's storm petrel. And this species and Leach's storm petrel are able to arc, kind of like shearwaters. They fly in this very arching pattern. Wilsons can do that, but typically they're just kind of fluttering around over the surface, picking around at small food. So this is, again, a very tropical species, and there are likely multiple species that you can see here off of the coast of Virginia that are still being resolved. They all have very different breeding time periods and islands in which they're breeding. The northern fulmar, this is a really cool species from the North Atlantic that comes down in the wintertime for Virginia. It looks like a gull. It's very gray-winged, white-bodied, but on these, you have these massive, thick bill that have these really intense tube noses. And so again, that allows them to detect food from far distances. And like other shearwaters, petrels, storm petrels, they arch around when they're flying. So they're arching high, diving down, arching high, diving down. Well, if you see a gull offshore, they're just flying usually pretty high off the water, just flying in a very straight line. So if you're seeing a gull that is arching around over the ocean, you might want to give that a second check and see if it is fulmar. So again, this is a winter species. We don't have as much diversity in the wintertime of Purcellformes, but this is one that you can find in the winter. Unfortunately, it is a species that has been negatively impacted by avian influenza. As a colonial breeder, northern fulmar populations are taking an unfortunate dive. Black-capped petrel, a really spectacular species. This is a gadfly petrel, and black-capped petrels, as other petrels, are incredibly high archers. They'll climb incredibly high up in the sky and dive down at incredible speed. So your encounter with black-capped petrels is usually pretty short. They're very, very fast, and they can travel long distances in a very short amount of time. This is a Gulf Stream specialist. So this is a species that people come from all over the world to actually see. They breed in the island of Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And there is some speculation there's some other islands in the Caribbean, but they have not been confirmed there. It is a really cool species. It has a dark cap and it has these little black stripes on the underwing, but it has a very broad white tail band. And this is really distinctive for this species. And I'll talk about it a little bit later with some other species that have a much thinner white tail band. So really cool. This is more of a tropical water species. Weirdly enough, because the Gulf Stream is really far offshore in the summertime, it's a little bit harder to see them in the summertime off Virginia. But in the wintertime, the Gulf Stream actually encroaches, comes closer to the shore, and it's almost more likely to see this tropical species in the wintertime off Virginia, which is really odd. Of all the ones I've seen the most in March and these kind of cold waters around Norfolk Canyon. So really fascinating. This is I believe, an endangered an endangered species. All right, these I'm just going to introduce. I'm not going to talk much about. These are some other incredibly rare petrels. The one I'm going to highlight most is the Bermuda petrel on the far left. There's some really cool books out about the Bermuda petrel and that it was rediscovered. There was only a few pairs left on the islands around Bermuda, non-such islands, the island off Bermuda, where there's now a substantial colony of Bermuda petrels. It went from just a few pairs to now well over 100. So it's really coming back with a lot of conservation measures to protect the species and get rid of the rats that are on the islands that eat the chicks. So Bermuda petrel look very similar to black-capped petrel. They have a thinner white tail band, and they're a little bit smaller with a lot more thick black on the underwing. They're a really cool species, very rare to see off the eastern United States. It's a bird that people spend thousands and thousands of dollars to try to see off of North Carolina. So some serious commitment is needed to see one of those, or luck. And then you have the Trindade petrel in the center. This species actually breeds in the southern Atlantic and then comes up during our summers and hangs around the Gulf Stream. It is a really dark species, another very fast flyer, very rare. And then the Fayez petrel, which is on the right. This is another species complex that breeds around the islands of Africa, on Western Africa and the Atlantic. And there are a handful of different species that are getting fully understood that are represented by this, but they have very dark underwings. Notice this versus the Bermuda petrel on the left, very thick black underwings, and then they have kind of a gray rump. Cory shearwater, we've seen this guy before. The Cory shearwater, again, it's this kind of gray-brown species. They're a very large shearwater. They're very slow flyers. They kind of do this very slow arching. They're lazy when you see them out in the ocean compared to other things. Again, they have these black bases of the outer primaries, which is the very tip of the wing. It's a lot more black there. And the scopoles here in the bottom right. Notice there's these little fingers of white that kind of slip into the tips of the primaries. These Cory shearwaters, usually you can see them throughout our summer. You can see them, say, from May all the way through maybe October. Scopely shearwaters, you can typically see them most likely here in Virginia in the late summer, early fall. That's when our waters warm up. The species Scopely shearwater is much more interested in our warmer waters that are related to the Gulf Stream. And the Corys, they like that warm water, but they're also happier being in a little bit colder waters than the Scopely shearwater. So very cool, large shearwater species. It's pretty distinct, at least the complex is. Telling Corys and Scopleys takes a lot of time. Great shearwater. This is one of my favorite species, a really dark capped bird with dark upper wings and a very thin white band at the rump. So again, different than the black-capped petrel, which is a very thick white rump. This is a very thin little white stripe. And then sometimes they have a little brown belly band. These really like colder waters. So in Virginia waters, we actually can see a lot more of them than they can see off of Hatteras in the Gulf Stream, just because we're in slightly cooler waters because of the Labrador Current. These also these breed in the southern Atlantic Ocean and then come up during their non-breeding time in our summertime to feed off of Virginia. Really spectacular species. Sooty shearwater, I showed briefly a little at the beginning. Its range, how far it can fly. This is a very thin-winged bird, and so it depends on winds to travel. Because it's thin-winged, when it flaps, it doesn't gain as much momentum as some of the other shearwater species. So this is a high-arching species. It depends on getting wind. So if it's a non-windy day, typically sooty shearwater is not going to waste its time and energy, and it's just going to sit in the water all day long. But when it's a windy day, sooty shearwater is having a blast. They're rocketing across the ocean. They're these very chocolatey brown bird with these kind of silver white underwings, which is relatively distinct compared to the other shearwater species. They have a long, skinny bill as well. This is one to see in Virginia. It's typically seen in the springtime, early summer. The fall, it's much rarer. Typically, they travel along the West Atlantic, and in our spring, and then in our fall, it travels down the East Atlantic, heading further down south. So it's less individuals are on our side of the Atlantic Ocean. Very cool species. Black and white shearwaters. A lot of black on the upper part of the body, and then on the underbelly and underwings, it's very white. The Manx shearwater, they breed actually in the United States, similar areas to Leach's storm petrels, and some of the islands off of eastern Canada and northeastern US. Audubon shearwater, now Sargasso shearwater, they are more of a tropical breeder that comes in and uses our warm waters in the middle of the summer. And so they're much more associated with the sargassum and the Gulf Stream. They're very similar. They just look like a dark bird on top with a white bird below. Again, very small differences. If you actually look between the legs in the Manx shearwater, it has white kind of in between the legs there in the bottom left picture. And in the Audubon shearwater, it has black in between the legs. So the Manx shearwater has these white undertail coverts. The Audubon's has these dark undertail coverts. Very similar looking birds. They also fly a little differently, kind of like I was just describing with the storm petrels. They have, the Manx shearwater has really sharp, long wings, and it arches a lot more. The Audubon shearwater is described as paddle winged. It has very broad tip wings and kind of flutters around a lot more and stays much lower to the water surface. Manx shearwaters you can see in Virginia in the wintertime. It's pretty rare, but they're around in the wintertime, and then throughout spring migration, and then spottily into the fall. It's most likely to see in the wintertime in Virginia. Audubon shearwater, the best time to see them is typically at the end of the summer, early fall, when we get a lot of this warm water that generates off the coast. So very cool little species that look super similar, but kind of come from different places. Oh boy. Whew. Jaegers. Jaegers are a really cool group of birds. They're kind of like the gull bullies. They're these birds that fly out in the middle of the ocean and they bully birds into giving them their food. They're like the eagles. The eagles go after the poor ospreys and steal their nice fish they just work hard to go after. Jaegers are the same thing. They'll chase after shearwaters that just grab that fish that was flying by and they'll bully that until it drops it. And they also, in some cases, they will eat some of the seabirds. The Pomeranian Jaeger in particular, this is a really large Jaeger species. They are typically breed in the northern hemisphere, up into Canada, Alaska, but then they'll spend their winter, their non-breeding season, all throughout the Atlantic Ocean down into the southern Atlantic. So they will eat small storm petrels or other weak birds that are just injured or on the surface. They'll go down and potentially drown them or kill them there on the surface and eat them. So they're big, bad bullies of the ocean. The Pomeranian Jaeger, the Jaeger identification, I could make its own separate course. It is a nightmare. But we're going to talk about the adults, which are a little bit more doable. The adult Pomeranian Jaegers have these thick spoon-like tips to the tail. You can see there in the bottom left. There's this protrusion of feathers beyond the tail tip that's very broad throughout the feather. Other Jaeger species, which you'll see in a second, do not have that thick tip. It's much sharper. They're also very fat-bellied. Pomeranian Jaegers are known for being barrel-chested because they're just a big, bulky bird. And they have these double flash, which in the center picture shows well. You see near the tips of the wings, there's that broad white stripe, and then right above it, there's another little white line. That's the double flash that you might see in a field guide that might be referencing that. It is distinctive for Pomeranian Jaegers versus other Jaeger species, which have a lot less white in the wingtip. Parasitic Jaeger. Remember the spoon here on the Pomeranian Jaeger in the bottom left? Now look at this parasitic Jaeger. It's got a little dagger going at the end. It's not nearly as broad or spoon-like as a Pomeranian Jaeger. And it looks a little different overall than the Pomeranian Jaeger. It doesn't have nearly as much white near the tips of the wings and these flashes. It's a much more reduced white, and it doesn't have the mirrored second double flash right above it. It has a much smaller head. These you can see in Virginia in November is probably the best time of year to see them. When there's a lot of gulls gathering and eating fish off Virginia Beach, this can be the best time to see parasitic Jaegers. They'll come in and chase around the gulls near the shore. And so they're, again, similarly chasing the birds into dropping their food, and then they'll come in and grab it. So it's kind of incredible. There's a handful of species that have specialized on bullying birds and stealing their food. Let's see. We're going to skip the multiple pins. Long-tailed Jaeger is the most incredible one, in my opinion. It is the smallest of the three, but it has this crazy long streamer behind it. As you're going to see shortly, these long streamer tails are surprisingly not rare among seabirds. I really don't know why. It's just something flashy, potentially good for attracting a mate. But it is just incredible when you see a spring long-tailed Jaeger just dragging around these little tail like all across the ocean. You would think it would not be a smart thing to do, but they love it. And they have a very small, narrow flash. You can see in these bottom left pictures and the bottom right, that white is very reduced. On adults and immatures, the white is almost non-existent, or it's kind of dissected in half. So that can be very helpful in separating those two species. They are much smaller and much more narrow wings. So they kind of look like they're a large tern. They kind of look like a royal tern that's flying in. They're just very sharp winged. They're very fast. They're not as big and bulky as the parasitic or Pomeranian Jaeger, which kind of appear more like a gull flying in. So really cool species. And again, with all three of these Jaegers, these all breed in northern Canada and Alaska. And then we see them migrating off Virginia far offshore. So really fun. Skuas. Oof. All right. Skuas are even meaner. The Pomeranian Jaeger's mean. The skuas are even meaner. You guys maybe have seen Happy Feet or some other kind movie with some adorable animal that's enjoying its life. And then a skua comes in and ruins everything. Skuas go to penguin colonies and snag baby penguins. They're awesome, but they're also evil. So, you know, you got to pick your battles here. They're just huge, powerful birds. Similar to if a hawk is flying over your yard, you hear the robins and the sparrows start to freak out. when you're out in the ocean, you can just feel that a skua is coming over. All the seabirds start turning, they start dropping, they start just like going everywhere. They start freaking out. Skuas are the big, bad, even meaner bullies of the ocean. They will come in and just eat anything that is injured or hurt on the surface. They'll even sit on the surface and eat from whale carcasses or other animal, large fish carcasses. So they'll eat. They're big scavengers, but they live far offshore. The great skua, there's 2 species here in Virginia. The great skua is only really a winter species that breeds in the North Atlantic off of northwestern Europe and into north above Russia. So that is a species that comes into Virginia waters in the wintertime. South polar skua breeds in the South Atlantic down towards Antarctica and then comes up into our waters in our summertime. And they'll just kind of mosey around. They'll just follow a lot of these shearwaters and other birds that migrate north and try to find a little snack. So they have these, both of them have these really impressive bright flashes. Again, they're much bolder on skuas than they are on Jaegers, and these are just much bigger, bulkier birds. If you've seen a great blackback gull, these are massive gulls. They're just big, broad winged. Skuas are like that. They're just big, broad winged, slow. Well, they're fast, but slower flyers, while Jaegers are a little bit more maneuverable and they're able to chase after foods and the birds into dropping their food. Similar to the fulmar, but potentially even worse, the great skua, which breeds in those North Atlantic islands, is also plummeting because of avian influenza. So many of the places that used to see them off the Atlantic coast in North Carolina, Virginia, further north, haven't seen them in years. Fulmar numbers also decline. So avian influenza is really impacting seabirds that are colonial nesters.
Does anything prey on them? I mean, do they have anything they have to worry about?
Sharks. I mean, yeah, sorry, the question was if anything preyed on skuas to even the odds. If skuas are sitting on the surface, or any seabird is sitting on the surface, fish or sharks can get at them. But in general, skuas they're kind of unbeatable. They live out in the middle of the ocean and they will just grab anything. Another thing that's kind of interesting to talk about is Jaegers and skuas, they're advantageous feeders. During migration, a lot of small like warblers and sparrows, they can migrate offshore. Blackpoll warblers is a spectacular warbler species that jumps off of the Northeast from, let's say, Massachusetts and flies across the Atlantic down to South America. Skuas and Jaegers will gobble them up. These migrating birds take a great risk by going offshore. They dodge a lot of the raptors that are here on land during fall migration, but there's also predators out there that enjoy their presence and will eat them. So something to think about. Even though they might live offshore, they might be a little too familiar with some of our warbler species. All right. Oh no. Is there a way to move this little thing? Oh yeah, we gotta show that off. All right, perfect. So the tropic birds, this is another one of these species that just have these ridiculously long tails. Why they need to have them, I really don't know, but I'm not complaining about it. The tropic bird species, the white-tailed tropic bird, they breed as close as Bermuda. And I like to think of tropic bird identification similar to royal and Caspian terns. If you're not familiar with that, royal terns have these thinner and more elongated orange bills, like the white-tailed tropic birds. The red-billed tropic birds have much thicker red bills. And so it can be helpful when in the field if you're seeing an adult to try to figure out what the color of the bill is. These are really cool in that they're very curious and they also fly really high. So the best way to look for tropic birds is not standing way out from the boat. It's actually just looking straight up because they'll be flying, I don't know how high above the ocean, let's say half a mile. They'll see a boat and they'll get curious and they'll actually just fly down and just kind of hover right above the boat. So people can have incredible encounters with these feeders as they just kind of hover right above them. So really spectacular species. These are primarily much more tropical, but they can come up and use our waters. If you ever get to see a tropic bird in Virginia, you're a very, very lucky person. Tropical terns, this is gonna be my last species description, so I'm sorry. We're almost there, I promise. They're tropical terns, they breed around the tropics, as the name might suggest, and it includes both bridled and sooty terns. These are species that, unlike a lot of the other tern species, live almost entirely offshore. Like common terns, they migrate a lot offshore, but they're typically along the coast, similar with royal, some of the other species you might be familiar with in this area. Bridled and sooty terns spend most of their life far offshore, feeding around sargassum, picking off the little fish that dare to come away from the sargassum for a second. And they breed as close as some of the dry tortugas off of Florida. So we can see them in our tropical waters in late summer, early fall, when they bring their juveniles to come and feed and learn how to live in our waters in the Atlantic. The juveniles are actually, for once, actually easier to identify than adults, unlike most birds. Bridled terns are much paler. They're very white belly, while sooty terns are like jet black, kind of almost like a black tern. And they're really, really cool in their long, skinny bills. The adults of the two species are very, very similar. Bridled terns have a gray back with a white stripe that goes over their eye. Sooty terns have a jet black back and wings with a very white front forehead, kind of like a cliff swallow, if you're familiar with what a cliff swallow looks like. And they have that little white spot right above the bill. That is just like the sooty tern versus the bridled tern. So they might be using that little white patch right above the eye. When they're diving, it just gives them a little more reflectance down on the water to potentially see and make a correct judgment on where the fish is. So these are our last two species. So you made it through that quick scream through our species. But seabirds live far offshore. They're kind of totally disconnected from our typical day-to-day life, you would think. Unfortunately, that is not the truth. Seabirds are greatly impacted by pollution. For years and years, a lot of our trash either in the United States or in other countries is just dumped into the ocean, out of sight, out of mind. That then forms and flows around in a lot of these ocean currents and is around, let's say, the sargassum mats. You can find sargassum mats with lots of bags of potato chips or other bottle caps. These little shimmering objects on the surface of the water look like fish. Birds, for however long you believe they've existed, thousands and millions of years, see that shining object on the surface of the water. They're like, that's food, I'm going to dive on that. And when they ingest one piece of plastic, at the time, it might not immediately kill them, but over some of these species' lives, which can be decades in terms of albatrosses, one piece of plastic a year can fill up their stomach and then cause them to starve to death. So this is a really sad image of I believe, a Laysan albatross that is just full of plastic. But it demonstrates how our pollution, our trash impacts things that we never interact with in our lives. So how you can potentially you can create change and encourage and protect seabirds is by cleaning up our rivers. Williamsburg, we're located at James River and the York River. These flow right into Chesapeake Bay and immediately go into the ocean. This is a really important area to be looking out and trying to clean up trash, do trash cleanups on the sides of roads, because this will immediately go into the bay and immediately go into the ocean. So consider that if you're interested in trying to protect seabirds and lots of other wildlife. But also, healthy fisheries are incredibly important. A lot of these birds feed on fish, feed on a lot of things that fish support as well. Now, Brian Watts, who I asked earlier if he had presented recently, they've done a lot of work with osprey. So I don't want to steal his thunder because it doesn't sound like he's presented to you guys yet. And so osprey are directly impacted by menhaden fisheries in the Chesapeake Bay. And in recent years and over history, there's been a lot of pressure on menhaden in the bay, which has impacted now osprey populations pretty drastically. This same sort of fisheries happens offshore, which impacts seabirds as well. So trying to promote a healthy fisheries is a very bedazzled idea. It's much more complicated than just saying protect our fisheries, but it's important to think about what our fisheries do and how they might impact things that are beyond our sight, out of mind. So with that is my main presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I'm sorry I ran through that. Yeah.
It's been several years ago, but up at Chincoteague, there were a few days where a number of us saw great cories, shearwaters, and Wilson storm peppers. Can you mention what might bring those birds to shore?
Sure. So the question was, a few years ago, there was actually a really incredible opportunity to see some of these pelagic species off of Chincoteague and off of the Atlantic coast. This was actually in response to weather conditions. In the late spring, sometimes there are a lot of strong northeast winds. And at that time, there had been days and days and days of this northeast wind. So for days, these migrating birds are getting caught up in this north wind and just following the wind because they're just trying to disperse. They're trying to find food, and they were getting blown right up into the coast. If you've been to Chincoteague, there were even shearwaters in Tom's Cove. They weren't even on the ocean. Some were even sitting on the beach, which was very dangerous for them. But winds play a really large role in our opportunity to see and interact with seabirds here from land. So in that situation, that was strong northeast winds for a long period of time.
It was sad, they were kind of exhausted. There were dead Corey's shearwaters on the beach.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a lot of fatality because of that. These birds are exhausted. They're migrating from, for great shearwaters, they're migrating across the equator, heading north. And so they're young birds, they're really hungry, they're just trying to find food, they're following the wind, and they get dumped off on our beaches, which for birders is really spectacular opportunity, but for the birds is really dangerous. So.
Are they able to fight the storm, the hurricanes? I know we're talking about a nor'easter pushing the winds in, but what about hurricanes coming up the coast and swirling around North Carolina, Virginia? Are the birds able to resist those in the fall, or they fall into that?
So the question was, how do seabirds interact with hurricanes? Are they directly thrown on land? How do they survive hurricanes, or how do they interact with hurricanes? I guess is the fundamental question. Actually, this past year, there was a paper that went out tracking some of these gadfly petrels and how they interact with hurricanes. Apparently, they know that there's a hurricane coming, and they can get in front of it, because hurricanes, with this really strong winds, they create kind of a feeding opportunity for a lot of these species. So some birds actually love hanging around hurricanes and will chase after the food that these large storms create the opportunity to go after. So there are some species that are known to actually figure it out, and they can kind of lead it, but then that does become dangerous when you get close to shore, and that does create opportunities to see a lot of these birds over land, inshore reservoirs. Some species, such as those tropical terns I just talked about, they are known for being seen around hurricanes. When there's a hurricane, that's really the only time to see them, because that's the only time they're near shore. So some species are actually able to interact in a positive way, chasing food, and other species are thrown on land and potentially die. So
they can't, that swirling, can they break away at some point and get back to the ocean?
So the swirling motion of hurricanes, some of them they can escape the hurricane. A lot of them end up getting stuck in the eye of hurricanes. So for some birders that have taken good notes of this, when the eye of hurricane passes over them, if you look up pretty high in the sky, you can actually see lots of seabirds just flying over. Terns, some other species that are coastal also just sit in the eye of the hurricane. And then when the hurricane ends up dispersing over land, that creates their opportunity to rush back out to the ocean. So some survive, but it is a very dangerous thing.
Well, organizations like NOAA take advantage of the birds who may know what's going on before they can actually use them as a predictor.
Yeah. So the question was whether or not organizations that might be tracking, listen to what I'm saying so you make sure.
Forecasting a hurricane, will they use bird migration or bird behavior as a vehicle for tracking and predicting a hurricane?
Sure. So the question was if bird movement and can be a way to actually detect hurricanes before they might initially detect them. From what I understand, there's something I can't speak a lot to, is that they're able to detect the hurricanes before the birds really figure it out, or at least before people realize the birds are responding to it. I don't have a deep knowledge of that, but yeah. Are there any questions online?
You mentioned avian flu.
Mhm.
How do we know how much is affecting pelagic birds, and how is it determined?
Yeah. The question was, how do we know the true impact of avian influenza on some of these seabird species because they're so far offshore? How do we really know there's a change in these populations? Some colonies are accessible. Though a lot of seabirds breed on really remote areas, some colonies are accessible, and researchers go out every year and will tag the individuals, track the numbers. It's that's their way of actually knowing the total population. So they can see on land how many of these birds are actually there during the breeding season. And that's how they can make these determinations the populations are declining. you know, from year to year, there are certainly fluctuations in any bird's population. So it's hard to know if you're seeing, you know, a drop or a increase in the bird, if that's a good thing when you're out offshore. But when you're actually at the colony looking at the total individuals, that's when you can really make a determination that the species is really struggling. So, yes.
Can you describe the timeline of a typical pelagic trip from Virginia Beach?
Then I'll tell you the real deal.
Oh, no. All right, the question was the timeline for a typical Virginia pelagic. So we are, we can go, if you can picture, and I can go back actually real quick. Let me go back so everyone that's watching online, close your eyes for a few seconds. We are about 70 miles from Virginia Beach to the mouth of the Norfolk Canyon. And that takes a good amount of time to get to. And for the best way to do it is with a big group of people. It's a lot more fun to share this awesome experience. That means the boat's gonna be a little bit slower. So the timeline is you're gonna be spending potentially 4 to 5 hours on a summer trip, just getting out to the area that you really want to be at. Now there are seabirds you can see on the way, and winter trips in particular, you can see a lot of the really special species like puffins away from the Norfolk Canyon. Summer trips, you really want to get to the deep water of the Norfolk Canyon or beyond. So it's really important to try to be out there as early as possible, but also, as early as possible. So the trips that go out of Virginia Beach vary in time. They're typically as short as 12 hours, well, as short. They're typically from like 12 hours to 16 hours is how the trips usually go. And so you're spending your first amount of time just kind of relaxing on the boat. And then when you get out into the deeper water, that's when things really get interesting. You get a lot more sightings of birds. There's so much more to pelagics. I can't emphasize that enough. They're just seeing whales and sharks, just realizing that these things are here off Virginia is an awesome opportunity. But you're spending a lot of time going. And then when you're out in the deep water, that's when you're kind of going slower. You're really paying attention to what you're seeing around you. And so you can go through long periods of quiet, not seeing much at all. And then chaos as everyone's running to one side of the boat to try to see one species. Did that answer that somewhat well, or did?
Yeah, and typically what time do you leave in the morning?
Oh boy. This is where I lose people. Depending the trip, I think the last one we left 4, just, you know, nice morning walk out to the boat. 4 to 5, there are some people that want to go. The best way to do a summer trip is to leave actually at like around midnight. So you're actually out there at the crack of dawn, because that's when the birds are most active. They're feeding at night, they're active in the morning. We have not had a trip like that out of Virginia. So typically they leave around 4 to 5 in the morning. Good. Let's see, yeah.
I have to stop sharing first.
Okay, we are coming to you online, people, if you have any questions. Nancy's working
Let me
some
go back to,
high technology here.
gotta go back to Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cost of the trip?
So the question was the cost of the trip. It can really, it can vary. Wow, I don't know why it's going so weird. It can vary. The cost of the trip can vary depending on how long the trip is. Rudy Tours does these Project Wildlife Adventures that I encourage everyone to check out. They focus a lot more on whales. They will make note of some of the birds, but you're going to miss some of the birds, unfortunately, on those trips. Those typically cost like, I think $160, $170 for a 12-hour trip. Granted, they're very generous in that they'll stay out later because they'll see whales, they'll get really excited and just stick out there. For birding projects, typically they're around $200. Then going up from there to maybe $250, $260, depending on how long the trip is. So that's roughly how much it costs to go offshore. Yeah.
Fantastic presentation, Andrew. Thank you. And great presentation. Thank you.
Wow, very
I
kind.
think we all agree. Any more questions for Andrew?
Anyone online have any more questions?
Anybody in Zoom land out
Anyone
there?
here that has any more questions? I have a few books up here. If you're interested to learn a little bit more about seabirds, there's some really in-depth ones. And there's on the far left, there's just like an easy little pamphlet that has a little bit about seabirds and other marine wildlife. So, yep, got a question?
Talk a little bit more about the geo or GPS tagging and tracking of these birds.
Sure. So the question was about the GPS tracking of birds. GPS and in general tracking of birds and wildlife is greatly progressing. There are tags out now that utilize small, oh boy, okay, kind of gathering all the thoughts. Some that are radio transmitters. So whenever they go near a radio transmitting tower, they'll ping. But for seabirds, you can't do that because there's no radio transmitters out in the middle of the ocean. A lot of these utilize these solar panel packs that sit on the back, which gives them power throughout the day. And then they're able to ping the exact or a rough location. You can have from as fine as, every couple hours to every day ping the location. I can't answer the deepest questions about how they work and all that stuff, but there are continually smaller and smaller bands and backpacks that these birds are able to be put on. For large seabirds, weight is really important. Even though these birds might be the size of a tern or a gull, they weigh a lot less. They need to weigh very little and be able to move long distances. So it's important to pay attention to have a really small tag on their back. And it's just we're just starting on this really incredible world of understanding seabird migration real time.
Yeah, because the pelicans I have found have the pack on the back.
Mhm.
Those were, at least the one I've had was designed to fall off like after 3 months or something like that. So I was trying to figure out how, if you've got a bird that is over the water for 6 to 9 months, how they're tracking it that whole time.
Yeah, so the question kind of continued to pelicans that have these packs that are designed to actually fall off. Some seabirds have the same thing where the pack just falls off. Most likely the pack's not going to get retrieved. And that's why it's really important to have a remote sending of the location instead of being able to retrieve it at the end of the day or at the end of the season. So now with this technology where you can send these remote locations, it's allowing us any work to actually happen with some of these seabirds. Yep.
Source of your funding.
What's most of the funding?
Source of your funding.
Ooh, source of funding. That's a really great question right now. Yeah. I can't speak too much to the source of funding, unfortunately. I have not been able to do a lot of this offshore seabird research. I just get to read about it and really feel happy about it. So I can't necessarily speak to what sort of contracts or money is out there with too much certainty. Some of this is maybe protected by endangered species, trying to understand where they're going. This is kind of interesting in regards to tracking birds. Sorry, I'm taking a step back. Sometimes albatrosses are tracked to see where they migrate, and they are actually used to find illegal fishing fleets because albatrosses and other birds, when they start flying in a very linear fashion, they're following a boat. And so some albatrosses have actually, because of the tracking of them, has led to kind of crack down on the legal fisheries, funny enough. Sorry, I took a step away from yours, but I was like, oh, I got to remember to say that. I unfortunately just don't have all the answers there. I would love more funding for that sort of stuff. That'd be awesome. Any last questions? We go online? Yep.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
This is dying. I think oh no, it's still there. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was amazing. And I would encourage everybody, do it once even. It's a long day. I think I kept low dose Dramamine going, which worked fine. And it really is thrilling. I mean, you get out there and it is crazy. Everybody, you have these 4 or 5 hours of kind of quiet, get out there. Although we had puffins and things, but then when you get out there and the birds are everywhere, it's quite exciting. It's very cool. I must say, these young people that can pick out these birds, it's really astounding because and sometimes they're kind of in a frenzy and they're coming and they're going and they're yelling off the right side, 3 o'clock this way, and it's really something. So, and he's the best. So I would, if you're gonna go with Andrew. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I don't know anything about the trip. Is that a 10-person trip or is that a 50-person trip? Or I mean, how many people are on
The question is how many people go on these pelagic trips? The big boat holds 40, 50?
Yeah, the big boat holds 40, 50, and it's a slower boat, but that's like the best way of having a somewhat cheap cost. If you did a smaller boat, you'd be looking at about $500, which is intense. So
Yes.
try to charter these big boats. Rudy runs monthly trips, right?
Yeah, so 40 to 50 on the big one. I think you guys sometimes go out on the 6-pack, and must be pretty pricey to just go out with 6 folks. But Yeah, Rudy does run, Rudy has a website, they run trips all year, maybe,
Almost all year.
almost all year. And so check out their website, they'll fill you in on the various choices you have and the options you have. So that was wonderful. I really just learned so much in that time. Now I really want to go out. Who wants to go out on a boat? Maybe we could, when's your next one?
I haven't scheduled it yet, but it'll probably be in August.
August. Oh, warm.
Warm.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Okay, well, thank you so much. That was really fabulous. We have just a few announcements. Scott Hemler, are you online? Would you like to say something about there he is.
Yes, this Saturday, the 22nd, we're going to have our monthly fourth Saturday bird walk at New Quarter Park. We're going to meet in the parking lot area by the park office around 8 o'clock, and we'll be out for about 2 hours or so. Like I say, we should be done by 10. There's our spring mire. I saw osprey today, so we see if there's any ospreys down at the platform. That'll be interesting to see at that marina, that nest on the marina. And who knows what other spring migrants, early ones that may start coming in the next week or so with some southerly breezes. And the weather's supposed to be pretty good. Going to be about 60 to 68 degrees. The morning when we start should probably be in the mid 40s. So yeah, it looks like a great day. So come on out this Saturday, 8 o'clock, New Quarter Park.
Great, thank you, Scott. Those are wonderful fun, and they're fun. They're open to the public. So besides Bird Club members, we actually get new members that way. They're a lot of fun. George, you want to say something about field trips?
Okay, our next field trip is going to be Saturday, April 19th. And we're going to go to Chipokes State Park. That's going to be a ferry ride across the James River. And so the plan is for everyone to catch the 7:20 a.m. ferry out of Jamestown. And we'll meet at the near the entrance at the Chipokes Park after that. I will send out the details in notes that I usually do a couple weeks ahead of time, and I'll also be putting the details into the next issue of the newsletter. But just mark your calendars for Saturday, April 19th, Chipokes State Park.
Thank you, George. And I want to be sure to thank Deborah Humphreys. I hope you're still there. I see your smiling face. We had a wonderful field trip to Machicomico. The weather was not our friend, but we did the best we could. I don't think we left anything out there. I think we got what was there. So it was a lot of fun. We had 25 folks. We had new members, we had out-of-town guests and members. It was a wonderful trip. And thank you to George for arranging all that. So George and Deborah, wonderful job. Thank you. Mary Ellen would like to solicit any photos, stories, anything you have for her for the newsletter. The deadline is March 26th. Yes. Shirley, you're up. Shirley's gonna tell us about spring bird count and a VSO event.
Okay, thanks very much. And thanks again, Andrew. That was just a great presentation. So, stand here. Okay. I'm going to wear two hats here. My first hat is the Bird Club hat. And I want to remind you, make sure you save the date of Sunday, April 27th for our spring bird count. Similar format to the Christmas bird count. It's a lot easier. We don't have to keep track of miles walked, miles driven, miles none of that stuff. We just keep track of the birds and the people. So, April 27th, I've sent out some email blasts already to the bird club and to the master naturalists and to some sector leaders. So, we have many of the same sector leaders are returning for the spring count. A couple are going to be out of town, so we have some substitutes, but it's all working out great. It'll be fine. Last year, I will tell you, we had 153 species on last year's spring count. That's pretty impressive, and 19 warbler species. That was on April 28th, so we're just a day earlier this time. And the good news is warmer weather. Remember December when we did the Christmas count? It was just so blasted cold. Don't have to worry about that. Only may have to worry about rain, but we won't worry about that. And more daylight, so you have longer to bird. Different birds. Most of the winter ducks will have taken off. There may be some stray ducks hanging around, but the birds are smaller. It's going to be the warblers. Warblers are here, and they're singing. So, tune up your whatever you use to practice your bird songs, your warbler songs. Tune that in. Put it on a continuous loop and run it as you drive around, so you'll know those sounds. So anyway, 12 sectors, same 15 diameter circle, and I'm the compiler again, so I'm going to be collecting all the information from the sector leaders and from the feeder watchers. There are a couple of neighborhoods that have feeder watch coordinators, and so the feeder watch coordinator will reach out to those folks, collect all the data from the feeder watchers and send it to me. So that's a great help. But only a few neighborhoods have those coordinators. So I'm relying on people out and about in the neighborhoods in our circle to watch their feeders and send their data to me. And I have the list from the winter count, so I know who to contact. So I'll be reaching out. So anyway, plan on that day, Sunday, April 27th. Okay, I'm gonna put on my VSO hat. I'm the membership secretary for the Virginia Society for Ornithology and have been for the last double-digit years, 12. The last person who had it was there for 30 years. I'm not doing that, not going there. But 12, I'm on my 12th year. Anyway, I'm here tonight to promote the upcoming VSO field trip to Gloucester County. And I know some of you were there last weekend for the field trip to Machicomico. There'll be a Machicomico again on Saturday of that field trip. They'll also be at a couple of other parks in Gloucester County. They'll be at Beaver Dam Park on Friday afternoon and Woodville Park on Sunday morning. And I know a couple of folks from the Williamsburg Club are going to help lead those field trips. So look for some familiar faces. And I think also the Middle Peninsula Bird Club is going to be lending some leaders as well. So it'll be a great weekend. It's not often that a VSO field trip is close enough so you don't have to rent a hotel room. We can drive from here to there in a half an hour. You don't have to rent a hotel room. So it's much less expensive. However, to participate in this VSO field trip, you need to be a VSO member. It's easy. It's card in the back. It's only $20. For a family, it's only $35. So, and once you're a member, you can go to all the field trips. Then you get all the newsletters and publications. And I have some free bumper stickers over there on the table if you want a bumper sticker. So consider joining. It's a great organization. We just finished the Breeding Bird Atlas. And we're proud to say that it got fully funded. It's fully funded of $300,000 over, and we finished early, right, Rick-Sam? We finished 6 months early. So we are super, super proud of that effort and the effort that so many people in this room put in the field. Several tens of thousands of checklists were submitted, and donations from a lot of people here in the room, as well as around the state, for to make that $300,000 goal. And it's due to be published in October, November timeframe, end of the year, into 2025. So Roxanne has had a big part in that over the course of the last few years. So anyway, that's VSO. We want you to join, and I hope you'll take advantage of that field trip to Gloucester. Roxanne.
I think I missed it, but when's the Gloucester field trip?
Thank you. The Gloucester field trip is May 16 to 18, right in smack of migration season. Should see some great birds out there. And Dave Yeager is going to show us his prothonotary warblers over there, right, Dave? Dave's got a prothonotary warbler nest box trail over there. So thanks very much. If you have any questions, you can see me after the meeting.
Thank you, Shirley. That's a lot of good stuff coming up. Patty, do you want to say something about our upcoming programs?
Okay, come April 16th, we have the William and Mary grant recipients that are going to be here with us. It's always fun to hear what they've been studying and working on this year. Samuel Arnold will be doing waterbird use of living shorelines across the gradient of urbanization. Sophie Rabanowitz, the movement of mercury from aquatic ecosystems to terrestrial songbirds. And Max Wolfink, the lateral extent of mercury contamination in songbirds and their prey. So that'll be April 16th here. May 21st, we've got Dixie Summers. She's going to be doing birding in Chile. So that should be fun to see all the great photos. And June 18th, we'll be back at the Chickahominy Riverfront Park. And Cheryl will be giving us her updates on her purple martins and what's going on in the world. That's it.
Great, thank you, Patty. That April meeting with the students is one of my favorites of the year. It's the young up and coming scientists that we all need. So hope everybody can come to that one. That's a great one. Does anybody in Zoom land have any announcements? Anything you'd like to say? Please feel free to speak up. I did see a Louisiana water thrush this morning. That was nice. Anybody else here in the room have any announcements or anything? Oh, yes.
We talk about the new proprietary warbler box.
Sure. Thank you. This past Sunday, 6 of us ventured out to Green Springs Interpretive Trail, and we installed 8 new proprietary warbler boxes out in the swamp. Good thing we wore knee boots because the water was up to here. And then the next day we got a couple inches of rain, and now the water would be up to here. So anyway, the boxes are in. They got baffles. Don't have numbers on them yet, but we know the prothonotary warbler's nest there. I think observed how many pairs last year? 5 or 6 pairs there last season. And so the question is whether they're going to choose our boxes or not. So we'll see. I expect the chickadees will move in first, and then the chickadees will, hatch 5 or 6, fledge those, and then we have to be sure we get in there and clean out those chickadee nests so that the prothonotary warblers can come in. So they'll be here about middle of April, something like that. So if you're out there, listen for them. Very distinct, sweet sound. And you probably see them too. They're pretty darn spectacular, and they it's a golden glow in the forest. So look for the boxes when you're out there. They're kind of deep in the woods, but that new box look kind of pops out at you. So be on the lookout. Thank you for that. Yeah, we put them in Sunday morning and I went back after Hawk Watch Sunday afternoon, to take a walk, and there was a bluebird sitting on one of them, checking it out. I said, no, they're too big. And I went back the next morning after all that rain, and I had to use binoculars. They looked like they were out in the ocean. They were, out of 8 boxes, I think we could have gotten to 2 the next day. And we don't want to do it with waders if we don't have to, so, but the water's going down. I told you I would give you an update on our little hummingbird, our Rufus/Allen's hummingbird. Bruce Peterjohn had a trip to Thailand. He came back. It took him a while to get over it. He wrote to me and said, okay, I'm back. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to try banding this bird. Get in touch with the homeowner and give me a couple of dates and we'll do it this week. So I immediately got in touch with the homeowner, who said, oh, I've been afraid to tell you that bird is gone. So it remains a Rufus/Allen's. We eliminated Calliope and well, we got it down to those 2. And unfortunately, it left, but hopefully it's gone back to find a mate and it will come back again next year. It might very well. So, and then the other thing, update on Hawk Watch, we're kind of clicking along. It's modest, we know that. We keep track of the first day we hit 1,000 birds, and our earliest was last year, March 14th. This year we hit it on March 15th. So we're right there. We had red-shouldered, red-tail, coot, sharpie, osprey, eagle, turkey vultures today. Anyway, we'd still love to have visitors. We stay 9 to 1, but we stay on Eastern Standard Time reporting to hawk count. So we're now actually there more like 10 to 2, although sometimes we come early, but I would love to have visitors. So that's about it. Anybody else? Anything, anybody seen anything fun? Oh, we do have a door prize drawing. So again, for those of you in Zoom land, I'm sorry you can't participate in this part of it, but we really appreciate you tuning into this, to Andrew's wonderful presentation. So now I think we have, I see some suet, I see some books, I see a coffee mug. Oh, Reese's Pieces. So we have a number of different things out there.
All right, first number is 522.
522.
The last 3. Oh, come on.
Oh, yay.
There you go, Sue.
Our new member. This is Sue. You're fine. While Sue's shopping, I'll call the next.
And we can donate, if you're a new member, we can donate one of Bill's, I've got Bill's books over there. Oh, you bought one?
Oh, I did.
Sometimes people grab them and I don't want to say no, so.
525.
525. Oh, okay. I'm pulling for you, Andrew. I don't know. I'm trying to work magic.
526.
526. Oh, George, no, look at that. You need to shake it up. We got a side-by-side winners over there.
520.
520. Oh,
John always
John, I think John, there's something going on. He wins every week. Is this the last? Okay, last one. 539. That is different. We mixed it up. Oh, yay. I think this is not your first time winning either. Alrighty. So that's it for now. Next up is the bird walk on Saturday. Hope everybody can come to that. And then field trip. I've lost track. And then spring bird count. The meeting. Anyway, newsletter will come out and it'll get you straight because there's a lot of things going on. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for tuning in Zoom land, and hope to see you all out and about soon. Birds are coming, so head out into this pretty weather. And thank you again, Andrew. That was amazing. I only wish you could make the Norfolk Canyon about a 1 hour ride. Thank you so much. That was great. Okay, thanks, everybody.